everyone, and welcome to Tech Talk. I am Jennifer Cooper. I'm the fractional CMO at fOCUS360. And today, my guest is Peter Dennehy with John Burns. Welcome, Peter. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Jennifer. It's fun to be on a podcast with you.
Yeah. Have you been on many podcasts?
It's funny. This is my third or fourth. So I'm actually, it was one of my goals for last year as a marketing sort of thing. And so, because I'm comfortable doing it. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to try different ones.
Awesome. Well, you're a veteran. Yeah, definitely fun to get on these podcasts or vlogs. There's all different formats today and have great conversation. Well, today, I want to introduce you first, give people a little bit of background about you. So Peter is a senior vice president with John Burns Research and Consulting Group. And definitely excited to take Tech Talk in a different direction today. Many times we talk about technology or maybe marketing very specifically, but today I really want to talk about market research, because all the things that we do as marketers and the home builders, if we don't have the research as a basis, what are we working towards? How are we evolving? What is our message? What are we buying? What are we building, right? So I was thrilled to take it in a little different direction. And let's kind of get back to the basics of understanding our market, understanding what buyers are wanting today, and make sure we're maybe doing some of those checks and balances as the market's definitely a little softer, a little bit more challenging in 2025. I think that's super important. So thank you. We're gonna talk a little bit about some of the current trends, maybe some things that a few folks have heard you speak about at any recent 2025 conferences. I am going to ask you a little bit for your crystal ball point of view of the market, because everybody wants to hear, not that it's crystal ball, but that we all want to hear different perspectives on where the market might go. None of us actually have that crystal ball, to correct myself, but some people might think they do. So I'd love to first, jump in and learn a little bit about you. Tell everybody who you are, a little bit about how long you've been in the industry, and what John Burns' team, you have quite a big team today with John Burns, what you guys do for the industry, in case we have any newbies watching Tech Talk today.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm a senior VP on the consulting side of John Burns Research and Consulting. And so, we are a research company that focuses in the U.S. housing industry. Everything from for sale to rental housing, building products, build for rent. We were one of the first companies that really started tracking that as a separate asset class, and we published a whole variety of research projects on build for rent. We have an institute that we call the New Home Trends Institute, which kind of studies design and consumer trends, and we do a lot of survey work with consumers to kind of give us a better understanding. And, a lot of my history is a combination of market data, consulting on specific projects, and then, really and understanding what's going on in the economy. And so I think our company is a perfect place for me, because we have a point of view on all of those things. Very quickly about myself, I started my career, I worked for a company called RCL Co., which is kind of a premier consulting firm based in Los Angeles. I then, I worked for Myers Group, which has become Metro Study and Zonda. I worked for John Burns about 10 years ago in a different iteration. And so I've had a long career kind of working with housing market research companies. I spent 5 years working as head of research at Newland Communities, which is the largest developer of master plan communities in the U.S. And in 2021, they were acquired by Brookfield Properties. And I worked at Brookfield in kind of a corporate market research and consumer insights role. So again, it's market, it's the consumer, and really understanding what's going on in the economy and how that all affects the housing market that I kind of bring together in the consulting that we do. And the last thing I'll say is that we do about 1,000 consulting assignments a year in our team. So we are working every day all over the U.S. and really kind of diving into what's going on in the market.
That's fantastic. Your resume is quite impressive. So I'm just going to assume that you've seen a lot, experienced a lot of challenges, and you've got a lot of data behind your knowledge bank there. Thank you for that background. Hopefully that helps everybody know. Connect with Peter on LinkedIn. He's very active on that channel. So and maybe his team at John Burns can help your companies as well. All right, so let's jump into some of the meaty research and insights that I know you're going to bring to us today. So I want to start with talking about the generations and a little bit about what consumers are wanting today. I feel like from a marketing standpoint, I've always got to be looking at what are customers wanting in the product development side, because we work with product teams. How are trends changing, interior design? What are people wanting differently in amenities? And I personally feel, again, this is just my lens, is that you'll see a lot of trends and desires and wants and needs stay relatively in the same box or bubble, but then you'll start to see some outliers and new things come in, maybe between the 5 and 10 year mark. But there's some like standard needs and then some changing needs. So I'd love to ask you a little bit about, maybe specifically what you're seeing kind of generation by generation, and breaking down maybe like Zennials. Let's start with the Zennials and then looking at some of the other demographics.
Yeah, we actually, the Zennials, as you're calling them, are really just starting to come into the housing market. They're generally under 30 right now. So a lot of them are still living with their parents or recently graduated from college, maybe with a roommate. We did a survey in our consumer survey group last year with Gen Z about kind of like their home buying aspirations. Most of them are not home buyers quite yet, but they're kind of an interesting group. Attainability is a huge issue for this generation. Housing has never been more expensive than for those that are in their 20s right now and looking to buy. What we found is that they actually had a strong interest in a future home ownership. They had they were pretty pessimistic about being able to afford it, on their own, because they're really just starting their careers, most of them. So they want to own homes down the road, but they really are pretty seeing it as very much out of reach right now. Despite that, they're saving for down payments. And then, something that's really important to keep in mind with this group is that they have parents who are homeowners for the most part. Home ownership is, set in the 70-80% range. Let's just say if you're the parent of a Gen Zer, you're probably a Gen Xer, or that's what I am. I have a 22-year-old daughter. And you're a homeowner yourself. You've benefited from the run-up in housing. These parents are very involved in their children's lives, and they're advising them about their future, home purchases or even rent, where they go. And we found in our survey that 2 in 5 of these Gen Zers were getting help from their parents, mostly towards an apartment, but if they were homeowners, that parents were helping with that as well. And so this is now their home feature preferences were not that dissimilar. So if they're going to buy something, they want a lot of the same things that, a millennial or other generations want. But they know that they have to compromise because of the attainability challenge. It's very tech savvy group. YouTube and TekTalk and other Instagrammers are very prevalent with this group. As we get into older generations, it's more of a Facebook, Instagram thing. But one thing I'd say we found in that Gen Z survey, which holds true across all the surveys we do, is that pretty much all the generations are kind of hip to new tech, but they want to wait until they know that it works well. So even the youngest ones. Moving on, we've got the millennials. Those are really, singles and couples, but really definitely move into their young family years as well. Now they've had a challenging start to adulthood. Their baby boomer parents grew up, like in a thriving U.S. economy, but a lot of these folks entered their workforce right after the recession. So they've really, they've had a hard time kind of getting established in life and buying their first homes. And they find, they place great importance on community. So finding the right location, they're much more socially oriented. So, they want places where they can walk to things and take their kids for strolls and go to the park and a coffee shop. This is a group that's working hard. They definitely are very interested in, not buying old properties that have to be fixed up. They're much more interested in new product, which is good for new home builders, and things that don't require a lot of upkeep, which costs money and time because these folks are kind of young and growing families, and they're not willing to spend time on things like that themselves. They are interested in quality over quantity. Their parents have these large houses that are stuffed full of things. This is a much more minimalistic, open space. Energy efficiency is highly important to this particular group. And so they want open space, open floor plans, clean, simple design. This is the farmhouse, generation. They want that type of design aesthetic in their home. Very tech savvy. And this again is your family years, and they want outdoor space at home for kids, for dogs, for socializing with friends and family. So that's kind of their preferences. And then I think the last group you wanted to kind of talk about is probably the Gen Xers. Really, me. I turned 60 this year, believe it or not. And so really, this is kind of the group that is the next generation of retirees. Our boomers that we've been talking about for many years, they're really in their 70s and 80s for the most part now. So presumably they've kind of moved on into where, at least thinking about it. This Gen X is your mature families, maybe an older or adult child at home, kind of college age, but they're probably still working. And they're a smaller group than the baby boom, but they're going to be outsized in our retirement market over the next 10 years or so as they kind of age into their 60s. We found that Gen X, that group is, their willingness to move for kind of like a change of lifestyle, let's call it, if we don't call it an exact retirement, is highest in kind of the 50s and 60s time frame. So, so I'd say it's a pretty fertile ground for movement. Hey, what are they looking for? I mean, they generally are pretty affluent. And they know what they want. I mean, these are the folks that are buying the homes. This is kind of like their forever home.
Sure.
And they're going to research it. And they're going to design into it, either the function that they want. The husband repairs bikes. He wants to have a workshop in the garage. The wife is a crafter. She wants to have a room where she does that. They want to move into a community where there's walking trails because they like to walk now in the morning, and they're very focused on wellness and health. So some of those things, some of their own priorities start to take, priority over like their kids.
Perfect. Now that's some great overviews. Some things that I'm hearing. There's some commonalities, right? So I'm hearing technology is important for the most part across the board, probably a little bit higher importance on the younger generations. So I challenge home builders to think about how are you positioning your technology in your homes? Are you offering any technology? And how are you highlighting that as a factor for how the house is going to live, or how people are going to bring their lives into that home? I was also hearing about, how are you talking to design preferences, how to use those spaces, how we're using spaces at home are much different today than they used to be, and they're still flexing. And then energy efficiency. I still don't think there's enough conversation around what does energy efficiency mean for your builder, down to how are you curating the homes? What materials are you putting in it? So there's some very specific factors that the home building industry as a whole can really be talking to those value propositions to make sure they're paying off what those life stages are absolutely wanting.
One thing. Oh, go ahead. You go ahead. I would say one thing I would put on your radar screen is also fire. The ability to weather like fire and weather conditions. There's a project here in San Diego where KB Home has actually designed the homes to be fire resistant. I mean, now no home is completely fire resistant, but they did things like build in the eaves so that embers couldn't like fly into the eaves and get stuck under the roof, and certain materials choices, and I know that in some parts of the country, batteries are going into homes because of power outages and hurricanes and things like that. So
I mean, Shawwood's also put some things into their product, as well. So they're just thinking through, so that you're meeting the customer's expects before they're thinking about what to expect, right? We're thinking through other things that are going to be important. So I do love how some of that innovation is coming in. I think another piece just to talk about, I talked about Zennials. I think about marketing to Zennials more than Gen Z because they're up and coming. They're not really, for the most part, the cohort that's ready to buy. But what I'm challenging other friends in the industry is to say, look at how the apartment industry is starting to market, what they're including in their apartment communities. They're really thinking of ease, more of a concierge service. They're very tech friendly. They're really thinking through community spaces. When you leave that experience, do you think your expectations drop or are they at a new level? So I encourage, just like multifamily tends to watch what hospitality is doing, we should really be watching what multifamily is doing, in my opinion, for some of those norms, and how they start to change as the years go by.
Sure.
Yeah, I know we could talk about the generations for quite some time. So kind of moving along, migration. I always think every year we hear about the U-Haul top 10 places to move, and we get different types of data points across other research professionals. But where are you hearing so far that people are moving from? Any insights on where they're moving or what's forcing them to move, or what are the considerations? Anything on big picture insights around migration?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was a tremendous wave of migration that was unleashed because of the pandemic, and we had a lot of migration to, let's just call them lifestyle forward places where people who didn't have to be at the office could live more affordably and could live, with lifestyle or a healthy environment or better access to nature. I think that trend is probably waning to a degree. I think that our top migration markets are still tend to be more Sunbelt, more weather friendly, let's just call it, compared to places like the upper Northwest and Midwest. But it's often, again, thinking ahead towards retirement or downshifting in work. Because you can work at home as somebody in your 50s or 60s, you might have more professional flexibility, to locating again close to where family have gone. A lot of our top job metros are in these Sunbelt states, Texas, Florida, and so there's been a lot of that migration happening. I would say it's also broadening a little bit. It used to be very much Texas and Florida, but now those markets are probably a little bit less in the bloom, and we're starting to see a lot more diverse migration to, like the Carolinas. Not everybody wants to live in Florida. Not everybody likes dealing with hurricanes. And so, we have a lot of people even moving out of Florida and going to other states in the Southeast. We seem to be seeing some strong interest in migration in the Midwest. Out of Chicago to an Indianapolis or a Columbus or a Des Moines. Is
that affordability driven still for the most part?
Yeah, again, moving down, maybe you don't have to be at the office all the time, but you want to be within, a reasonable commuting distance, more affordable metro areas, better quality of life. We continue to see a lot of flight out of the Northeast in California, particularly to places like Texas and the Southeast in particular. And, I guess it's a little early to say, but, we might see some changing as return to office becomes more prevalent in some of the big cities where there was out-migration. And, that would be probably places like Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., although Washington, D.C. is in a trouble area of its own. The Bay Area, some of those markets are getting people kind of working back in them again. They might have moved to Austin. They've had a couple of years there, but they're moving back to San Francisco because they're expected to be in the office more frequently. So, I think the American people continue to move. Mobility is highest in those that are, as I said earlier, under 50. So it's really the people in their 30s, 40s, kind of active, career driven, and then that first group of retirees that are kind of like making, kind of long-term decisions about where they want to be.
Sure. And from a marketing standpoint, I love all that data, because every year I want to use that data of where maybe the trends are, but then also be working with your local sales teams to understand really where are the buyers coming from, or your online sales counselors teams to understand where is the interest coming from, so that you can make sure that you're properly targeting the right message, so that if you're getting an influx of maybe Chicago coming in for like a slower down, more relaxed lifestyle, there's your message. And then you can shoot up that message up to Chicago to attract more of that buyer if you're finding some
Right.
synergies or things like that. So that's where it's not just interesting data. Let's turn it into data that we can use, for our communications on what we offer. So
Oh, sure.
thank you. Thank you so much for that detail. All right, so moving on, got a couple more questions. We do try to keep Tech Talks kind of short, but I know we could talk on a lot of these topics for probably a couple hours, Peter. So the next one is one of my favorite topic areas is new home design trends. And I know Jenny Nichols that works with you and several others on your team do great reporting on design trends. So I'd love to hear, is there anything personally, design is personal, anything personally you're seeing out there that you think is really interesting and something to watch, or any details from your team that would be worth sharing today?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on one earlier, designing homes to weather the climate and fire. I think that's very topical in a lot of states right now because of home insurance.
Yeah.
Home insurance challenges, and we do have a lot of weather issues and climate issues around the country, and so people are having to deal with that. So I do think that that's kind of an important trend. Housing attainability is a problem. I mean, interest rates have stayed higher for longer, as they say, and they don't seem to be going down, and we don't expect them to. We expect them to stay kind of around where they are this year. And so, housing attainability and really focusing on delivering a product that, offers what you need, but doesn't offer a whole lot more. I think, especially to that younger end of the buyer spectrum as they start to age into the market. I think 55 plus housing is a huge trend. Again, obviously the boomers have been a big dominant force in the market, that barbell. We've got younger buyers and older buyers kind of downshifting. But, I think that we see a greater variety of 55 plus housing need, both in terms of location, product type. Not everybody wants to move to, I'll pick on Florida again, Florida or Arizona. I'll pick on Arizona. Not everybody wants to move to like a golf course, Del Webb community in a Sun Belt state. People want to sell their home, maybe rent and travel. People want to sell their home, move down, maybe, in the same city or state so that they're close to friends and family or their social structure. And then there's, again, there's the folks that want to live out of state, into other areas. So just a whole range of kind of like downsizing options for people that is driving the housing market. I think those are, some of probably the big trends. Sustainability.
Generational, multi-generational households where
absolutely.
I'm seeing more of that, I think, just based off of the aging parents, and you've got successful households, and they just decide to bring mom in instead of sending, or mom or dad sending them to another facility. So
I mean, that's not really a new thing. I'd say, it probably started 10 or 15 or so years ago when Lennar started doing their multi-gen type of product. A lot of builders are doing that now. I think traditionally it started off and it was really very much like, the couple in their 50s and maybe in their 50s and 60s with the parent in their 80s moving in, and that was it. But I think it's broadened quite a bit. So, I mean, there are people and, this Gen X group that might have an adult kid that just graduated from college. They might have a need for a multi-gen type of approach. So they can put their 22-year-old up, in that room, and mom and dad can live in their house. And kind of like start to form separate households under one roof. So I think that with so many young people that are just emerging from college in particular, and saving money to buy and aspiring to buy, that there's a new need for that multi-gen housing for those, especially given how hard it is to move out these days, and how it's not likely to happen until later than your parents did it.
Yeah. And I'll just throw in the dual primaries. When you have a dual primary and really set up as a primary with suites, bath suites and things, you have the option for a lot of flexibility for the multi-gen, for the kid coming back from college, or for a roommate, an
Right.
older female divorced or widowed with another divorced and widow. So that offers a lot. And I don't see that happen. I don't see that design a lot, thinking about the area. So just for that one, that's one that I kind of watch and
Yeah.
I think could be
And,
good.
I think that's a product that's really not very available in the existing housing market. And so that's why, new builders can really build to that audience, which is I think it's growing and diversifying again.
Gotcha. All right. So we'll wrap up. Is there anything, well, first I do want to ask you your forecast. Everything going on. So I know someone's going to want to hear this. What do you kind of see 20? How do you maybe see 25? Maybe I'm giving you all these asterisks and legal disclosures. How do you
Yeah.
maybe see 2025 playing out based off things you're watching, your team's watching, and your forecasts?
Well, we're off to a very tumultuous start of the year, and housing is used to tumultuous times, so hopefully everybody's enjoying it right now. I would say the housing market is fair, for the most part. Particularly the new housing market. I think we all expected that 2025, 3 or 4 months ago, that 2025 would be a good year, that interest rates would go down steadily, and that home sales would start to pick
That was
up
me.
because builders had started, and they kind of caught up, and they're looking ahead, and demographics are there, the job growth was there, interest rates are starting to come down finally at last. It's really changed a lot. There's a lot of chaos, of course, with the tariffs and their impact on the economy. I think there's a lot of concern about that. The labor market is solid right now, but if that changed, and in certain market areas, Washington, D.C., which 10 or 11% of employment is directly related to the federal government. I think we are starting to see some local markets have challenges, from a labor and employment market point of view. Inflation is still high, a little bit higher than the Fed would target. They're probably not going to be cutting interest rates as quickly as they might have seen a couple of months ago, because there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen, how long tariffs might impact the economy, and how they will impact the economy. And so, if anything, they seem to kind of be like weighing inflation, the possibility that inflation could pick up again, if costs start to increase because of tariffs. And so, if anything, they're going to be kind of cautious, wait and see, instead of that steady decline that we thought was pretty assured. So I think that all that really means is that interest rates will probably stay where they are. We are forecasting, pretty flat new home sales, maybe down a little bit. Builders, had definitely ramped up production heading into the year, but we think they're probably going to start to slow starts a bit, just to make sure that their inventory doesn't get out of hand. And builders are in a good position because they're still able to buy down rates, but they're in a really tough position because those are expensive buy downs, and rates are not helping them, and they also have to deal with whatever tariff headwinds develop in their costs. So for builders, margin compression is very much the word of the day. Whether it's cost of sales, cost of goods, cost of construction, it's all going to be on their mind. So we're kind of thinking maybe like a modest increase in pricing and a modest decrease in starts for the year, but kind of a flat housing market, and not one that was kind of moving forward substantially. And then I think in the resale market, we actually are expecting that there is more supply in the market, and kind of a modest increase in sales for the year.
I would say I'd have to agree. From things I'm watching, it's definitely a time to be strategic and think a little bit on the lean side, but the strategy side.
So I mean, as long as the labor market holds, housing, there is demand for housing. That's really kind of one of the things to kind of keep an eye on. But there's a lot going on.
There is. 2025 is a very challenging year, but it's a growth year. That's when we learn, and we look at our system and processes when these things happen.
I would also just say that we also have to really keep an eye on consumer sentiment. which tends to be very heavily influenced by expectations of economic change, which I think most people, there's a lot of change in the world. And so I think people are kind of, people can hold off when there's uncertainty. And then we have seen, pretty substantial loss in the stock market, since the beginning of the year. And, that was very helpful for particularly those affluent parents that were helping their kids buy a home. So, some of that stock wealth that they were counting on might have gone away, or to fund. So, I don't want to be too negative, but I mean, those are all things that will be playing out this year in the market. I think we had an 1,100 point day or something today. So, it can change. But all of this is stuff that we have our eyes on, and it has impacts on consumer behavior, consumer sentiment, and what they actually do. Because, buying a home or moving to a new location or retiring and buying a place, those are all really big life decisions. And particularly the more discretionary ones can be postponed.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And we have to watch consumer sentiment. I mean, we see it in web traffic. I see great, healthy web activity, but people just aren't converting to leads. So They have the desires. The longer they have to sit and marinate over what they want and wait, when the market does turn, it will be hot. But we also have to figure out how can we bring them in and look at what choices they have, even amidst that sentiment. So that's when good marketing comes in.
we do a monthly survey of builders about sentiment and sales, and I will say that we're having kind of a weak start of probably the weakest spring selling season that we've had in a couple of years. And so it's for all the reasons we've kind of been discussing. It's good, but not great. It's fair.
Not good.
It's fair, but everybody's a little pessimistic.
Yeah. Well, these are all things, it's part of we have to understand our wheelhouse. So, which is why it's so important that people stay on top of the trends, the details, and the data more than ever. It's not just interesting to hear. The teams really need to be digging in. So, well, I want to thank you so much for coming today. It was very insightful. I hope, again, our audience does connect with you on LinkedIn. Are there any future conferences that you're going to be at? Get a quick shout out for the John Burns team.
Yeah, I mean, one quick thing I would say is we have a newsletter which goes out that you can sign up for on our website. It's free. We cover all kinds of trends as they're coming and going. And if you follow many of us on LinkedIn, you'll see a lot more. We're constantly churning out the latest in data and takes on the housing market. I'll be at ULI in Denver. And I'm sure many other places as the year goes by. Hopefully I'll run into you.
I know we will again. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning into Tech Talk today. You can find us on Spotify. You just want to listen to the recording today. And we're also on YouTube and Vimeo. Have a great day. Thank you so much, everybody.